71% of supply chain leaders today say they are not ready for, their organizations are not ready for the scale, for their future growth ambitions. Only about 29% of the data that manufacturing and shop floors generate ever makes to any sort of discussions or decision making. That means more than two-thirds never makes it to any conversation, let alone any execution or decision making. And a disruption on one side of the world drives food inflation greater than 9% on the other. That is not a forecast. That is what we are predicting, or analysts are predicting UK's food inflation is going to be by end of this year because of conflict somewhere else. Hello and welcome to Inspire XD Connected Intelligence Live. I'm Kuldeep Thakur, I'm your host, and today we are asking one question. Is your supply chain ready? These three facts that I just talked about, they are not random numbers. That is broadly talked about analysts, the industry is worried about them, and they all tell one story very clearly. And that's why we are here today to unpack some answers, bust some myths, have a general conversation around what can we do, what we are doing, and how we can help. The world of technology is moving at extraordinary pace, but the world of supply chain is not able to leverage that at a similar pace at the same times. And there are several reasons for that. When I started this series some 9 episodes ago, I simply just reminded myself of the promise that I made myself when I started Inspire XT, that I would continue to do my best to bridge this gap that exists in our industry, which is holding us back from achieving our very best. And the gap between promise and delivery, the gap between ambition and execution, and the gap between the pace at which technology comes with the adoption is taking place. And that is right at the center of our mission. In connecting commerce to operations, these gaps are our villains. That is what we are dealing with. We call them silos, we call them integration challenges, we call them transformation risks, but they are the same things. And I believe we can eliminate them, we can resolve them. It's not easy. It requires will, courage, and discipline, and vision, and all that. But we need to have a technology that amplifies these growth ambitions and doesn't hinder them. And that is what we're going to unpack today. And to help me do that, I'm joined by two extraordinary guests who approach this topic with the same approach, but from different sides. They both have dedicated their careers and their life's work to help supply chain executives uh, solve these exact problems. I'm genuinely grateful to both of them. They accepted my invitation to be on this podcast, on this conversation for such an important and urgent topic. Let me invite them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our questions and discussions. Before I do that, my request to anyone listening online, watching online, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window. We will look at them through the discussions and we'll make an attempt to answer as many as we can. If not, we'll follow up with our answers uh, at the later time. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. So let's do some introductions. You both are very renowned personalities. Of course, introductions are just to complete our rhythm here. So, Nigel, I invite you to introduce yourself briefly. Tell a little bit about your personal fun fact, um, and then we'll get straight into it.
Okay, thanks, Cody. So yes, hello guys. So Nigel Cox, I lead the supply chain business here in Oracle for UK and Ireland. Been in this role actually a year and a half, and prior to that, I was in Ghana for 17 years and part of the supply chain group there. So I spent a lot of time and had a huge privilege actually to see supply chain move from back office to boardroom. We joke and talk about licking labels, kicking boxes, to orchestrating the most important part of the business to CEOs and investors. And I've been privileged and very lucky to be part of that journey and very close to a lot of those people that really took the profession to another level. So yes, thanks, Cody. Very happy to be here.
Welcome. Thank you. And Gerald, over to you.
Thanks, Kuldeep. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and always enjoy spending time with my good friend Nigel Cox. My name's Gerald Jackson. I'm a vice president of product strategy with the Oracle Fusion sort of cloud supply chain offerings. I've spent 30 years of my life in the supply chain game. I started off in what I call Jack Welch's GE as a Lean Six Sigma, black belt, pushing, high pressure turbine discs around shop floors, introducing Lean and Six Sigma, and really getting my hands dirty in the game of supply chain. I spent about a decade after that as a systems integrator, worked at Accenture, helping companies around the U.S. primarily integrate technology that was emerging at the time into transformational supply chains. And then equally, I spent just under a decade in industry leading the adoption of both lean and technology to drive transformation in high tech and manufacturing organizations like Microsoft's Xbox division, introduced the Surface computer, and did similar jobs at Google. And then the last 10 years or so, I've been focused on taking supply chain into the future, working with IoT, advanced artificial intelligence, and helping to evangelize the great work we're doing here at Oracle about changing the shape of supply chain. So fun fact for me, I like doing hard things. So I'm pursuing my black belt in Kempo martial arts here at the ripe age of, not too young. But I'm really enjoying the learnings from there and figuring out how do I apply the concept of adaptability, sensing, and responding that I'm learning in martial arts also into supply chain. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And from one hard thing to the other, harder thing, the black belt side of it. So thank you for sharing that. Um, I mean, in this conversation today, we have decades of experience, the real lived experience in supply chain and building solutions and implementing them, and also on the other side of the world, kind of the supply chain, experiencing them. And I want to make the best use of this time. I want to get as much as out and share with our audience, um, because I think, generally speaking, there's so much technology and people are confused and AI, and I think it's good if we can just take some theme and we'll talk about how we can start helping people in that. So, Nigel,
Mhm.
let me invite you to share some insight. As you said, close to 2 decades with Gartner, um, advising executives around supply chain and working with some of the most senior figures in the industry. Um, Obviously, now you're in Oracle for a couple of years, and other side of the table, using technology, advising using technology. Um, so you've seen it from the future perspective, from what the technology can do, all those angles. Um, what are your thoughts around this gap that we see? People have ambitions, they have strategy, but execution is sometimes or most of the time struggling, basically. And how do you sort of see that from both angles, both sides?
Yeah, thank you. So, okay. So yeah, it's actually with my teams that were running. I was running the organisation, but you would see a huge, vast array of companies across the world and supply chain. So, first we'll take a look at that supply chain journey. And it's been on a wave, an incredible wave. And I mentioned in my opening gambit. But we're seeing CEOs come from supply chain at the moment, and markets react really well to that. So when it comes to the change, it sits in two camps. I mean, I look back and I think probably there's organizations that we used to do maturity assessments with, for example, right? And they would sit at like a 2.2 or something like that. And then I speak to them now in this world at the same companies, they're still 2.2, right? They're unable to move. And I think this really highlights the gap between your chief supply chain officer with a completeness of vision and then the business accountability, speed of action, and their ability or lack of to make that change. And there's this huge cavern of gap between that. So that gap often sits, we see in this world, data, process fragmentation, misalignment of organizational responsibility, often between supply chain and technology. And they sit in these silos, which prevent technology from moving things forwards, right? They're unable to become digitally native at all. Some of these companies, I think, are really going to struggle and feel the pain in the coming year or so, that whatever comes our way. On the second side, we sit at the other camp, and you've got these organizations that are incredibly impressive with, their vision, their execution, their roadmap. They're focused on the business outcomes. Why did they buy it in the first place? How does this set up with their entire ecosystem? And these guys are leading the AI era. They really are. And so from our point of view, from Oracle, we come in and say, we want to give you everything you need, innovation that matters, and we're absolutely committed to their success. So they're probably some of the main gaps, right? But when you look at an organization, you get, excuse the philosophy here, but it's one of those where you look back to look forwards, right?
Yeah.
And what those organizations were faced, or any company was faced with, say, in the financial crisis of 29 to 08, different. The changing world of 1939 to the changing world of COVID, the internet bubble of 2000, and whatever's coming our way in the future now, right? They're different. But the two parts that were mainly different, I would say, is speed, number one, right? Speed of decision making, speed of change, speed of making these informed decisions, also to take advantage of it. The speed of any changes is like nothing else that's happened before. And then you look at or I would probably call it their capability to execute, right? It's well documented that the companies that go into any downturn best prepared come out of it the fastest, right? And that's technology, and that's also their people and process, right? So these are the same gaps that you see in organizations. So they're the big things that I see on the horizon. And then the other part of it is around focus, right? So I saw there was the supply chain leader of General Motors was at one of the 0100 events, and he was talking about, we've got no shortage of AI initiatives, right? No shortage. What they needed was clarity to focus. And having that focus, I think, is critical. And that's why some organizations seem to get a little bit lost. So from an organization and its chief supply chain officer, I'm looking at what's the strategy from the CEO, okay? And, where do I have the most exposure to implement that? They're probably some three things I'll be looking at right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's so relevant. I think you called out some really fundamental points. Of course, vision matters. That's there. Nothing or very little gets done without one. But the accountability that you called out, I think that's quite key, because unless everybody is sort of aligned to that vision and is taking a personal responsibility to realize that vision by speed of decision making and right experimentation that aligns to that vision, awesome. And I think that's kind of what we see, the gap that all the time we keep kind of blaming technology most of the time, but it's not really that. I think technology can do a lot of what we haven't even thought about. It's just taking accountability and making it work and aligning with the vision. So thank you for sharing that, Gerald. Continuing with that, and in your introduction, you talked about how you've dedicated your last 30 years of your good work to supply chain. Um, so I'm not going to repeat all that, but I'm going to just ask you, how's Oracle different? How's this stint that you're leading at Oracle
Mhm.
different, progressive, and how you can you building using all that experience at Oracle and for the benefit of the industry?
Yeah, Oracle. The reason why I joined Oracle is because what they're doing here is different. It is different. You mentioned early in your sort of preamble to sort of kick this off that there's a very small percentage of companies that are actually using the data that they're collecting across their supply.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. Okay. We're back. And so part of my experience was working with companies, connecting their equipment, connecting their supply chains into data repositories that they could use to make decisions. Now, the interesting thing about supply chains is work is done in applications, right? It doesn't matter how much data I'm putting in a historian. It doesn't matter how much data I've got collecting and storing on the edge where my machines are, if it's not integrated into the work that my people are doing up and down the organization, from the shop floor to the top floor, as they say. That data has got to be integrated into how the decisions get made. And one of the things I can say about what we're doing at Oracle is, one, we've got one of the world's best sort of platforms for managing data. We've been managing data in probably the best way for the last 50 years, right? Oracle has nearly invented the database category, so we know data. We know how to secure data. In the last 20 years, Oracle has proven that we also know business applications. And in the last 3 to 5 years, we've shown that we also know this new thing called AI. And so what we're doing differently at Oracle is we're pulling all of that together and creating new ways of working for customers, allowing them to focus on their business outcomes, streamlining the way folks interact with data, make decisions, collaborate with each other. And so this fusion platform that we've got that sort of takes out all the waste across the silos and puts the data in context in the hands of the users so that they can actually focus on driving business outcomes. So what Oracle is really focused on, we're taking our $8+ billion of R&D every year, and we're trying to figure out how do we abstract all of the minutia of technology out of the way from our customers and let them actually focus on doing work and getting outcomes for themselves and for their customers and stakeholders.
Yeah, that's so true. Um, I've been in ERP world for a while, and one of the challenges, of course, for Oracle or any other vendor is that how do you keep talking about this differentiation, the uniqueness is the ability to leverage this collective insight, whether it is infrastructure, platform, apps, and the modern apps that are built for cloud. And um,
Yep.
I believe that plays to its strength, but sometimes can also play to not being kind of recognized how good and great the platform and what it can do, because people are looking at the new thing with the old lens.
Yeah.
And we have that moral obligation to try keep educating that this is not that, this is modern, this does, the data platform does everything that you need it to do and a lot more, because you've got the context of the application, the AI, everything right built in it. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But while I'm with you, let's talk a little bit about supply chain, the context of current challenges that we're facing, right? So, I mean, for as far as I can remember, supply chain has been under some pressure of some sort. There's been something or the other going on for last
Yeah.
several years, and but this every now this feels very different. What we are going through is a bit different. Um, like six maybe a year ago we'll talk about tariffs, and but tariffs is now like a permanent feature of your supply chain. Nobody's complaining about it so much, I'd say, as a feature of the supply chain. Regional conflicts and all that. But from the gap that we are talking about, what executives believe they can actually do in today's supply chain, but what will happen if the next shock showed up? Like, what is that gap, and how is that sort of preparedness? And I think that's quite key to sort of contextualize that in today's world.
Yeah. Was that one for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is an area where I spend a lot of time. So if I go back in time, just 10 years, right? Maybe 15. Disruptions are not new to supply chains, right?
Yeah.
Shifts in demand, supply shocks, weather events, these are not new. Back in my day, as an old man would say, we used to do this thing called war rooms, right? I think the best supply chains knew that silos is where disruptions destroy your business, right? The information flow between planning and logistics and manufacturing has to compress when you're faced with a disruption. And so what we used to do is we used to get an army of people and we'd put them in a conference room, and then we'd have an army of analysts behind them pulling data from everywhere. And then we would spend hours and hours in the day combing through the data, combing through the spreadsheets to understand the implications of a disruption that's in our supply chain. And we would spend hours upon hours to figure out how do we understand the impact and how do we put together plans of action. And then even more importantly, how do we coordinate the execution of these plans of action across silos? Now, when disruptions hit us once every year or maybe twice a season, this was sufficient.
Yeah.
Right. But now we're in a world where we're getting, what is it? I think 94% of all businesses have been hit with a major disruption in 2025. That's up from 80% the year before, and that's up from 65% the year before. So we're just constantly getting hit. So these old ways of managing disruptions are no longer sufficient for supply chains. So leading companies are recognizing that the gap that matters is the gap between sensing that a disruption has occurred and the time it takes to understand the impact and ultimately mitigate that disruption, right? So that now represents a competitive window, right, across all industries. Who can more quickly sense that the disruption is happening, right? Sometimes we wait till it shows up as a missed sale or a lost shipment or something like that.
Yeah.
But we have data now that's out there, and AI and agents and things like that that can actually sense better. So companies recognize that there is value in early sensing. This is not the same as forecasting. This is recognizing that change is imminent, right? That something has happened and it will impact me in 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks time.
Yeah.
That gives you time to drive the response. Making that information available across your supply chain gives every node in the supply chain an opportunity to start building a response. Now, the other thing is we're finding that companies are getting hit with multiple responses at once. They're getting a unplanned shift up in demand because a new influencer is wearing a new type of shoes or something, right? And now you're going to see a scale up in demand. But that might be regional. So you might have an aggregate plan that's still accurate, but now a different region is going to be taking that.
Yeah.
On the supply side, you've got an earthquake somewhere, right? And now you've got to look at alternative sources of supply, right? And then, heaven forbid, inside of the 4 walls of your factory, you have an unplanned equipment downtime. So all 3 of these disruptions are starting to converge.
Yeah.
And companies are looking for their technology to enable them to see across the supply chain, collaborate across function, and then put actions in place and drive to outcomes without having to get an army of people in a room with an army of analysts crunching data and then spending weeks to just figure out what's going on and then build action plans.
Yeah.
One study shows, is that like it typically takes like 21 days for this type of a converged disruption to fully be resolved. But when you think about what's possible today with technology and AI and holistic management of your supply chain, you can start managing disruptions in hours instead of weeks. So that's the ball game right now. And this competitive landscape is really in the context of how quickly you can close the gap from sensing disruption.
Yeah.
He's dropped off, but
No, I think he's back.
sorry,
But
the
Nigel, you want to add something?
disruption here is focused around an organization's capability to execute, right? And we're working with organizations to structure that right now, you know, because they could press this red panic button at any moment. It can all happen.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, supply chain leaders really are, you know, building the plane while flying, because there's a gap where they are. You know, they've got cost pressures, shifting geopolitics, but this is why apps, you know, and AI built in is so impactful for them, because
100%.
Gerald's point about getting, you know, 100 people in a room, that doesn't need to happen now. It's like, obviously we're using technology, but, you know, if AI isn't changing decisions at scale, it's not changing the business.
Yeah.
Right? That's how these leaders need to think of this.
Yeah, and it's so different way, pragmatic way of looking at. I think the narrative that we are faced with is, if you start about AI and the impact on the workforce, is very negative. It's about AI taking jobs, but if you really look at the pace of disruption, is actually quite fast, and it's very repetitive, and the numbers you highlighted are nearly doubled in less than 3 years' time. So you could afford to do an army, as you said, of people once in a while, once in 6 months, but you haven't got those people. So it's essentially creating that ecosystem of capabilities, that one thing is given, that disruption is going to happen. We just don't know when and where. So how do I equip my people with that technology, add more capability using agents and automation, so I'm able to do that competitive advantage which you talked about. Because if your competitor is better prepared, disruption is not essentially. I think something is going on. We're back again. I think we'll take that. So I'll just sort of summarizing that before I move to the next topic, which is actually quite relevant and a good segue, is that I think that this educational material that you talked about in terms of how to view these capabilities for the future, and not get bogged down by AI being a negative force for workforce and taking jobs, because it's helping you maintain that shortest possible competitive window, survival of the business, and of course creating net new capability that you didn't have before, right? So that's what the gap, and I think there's still, I think there's still that kind of mindset that, hey, we'll wait for it to mature and have more use cases before we embark on something like that. But you could be doing something today and using these very discrete pieces of capabilities that organization can benefit from it. And to that, of course, Nigel, one huge productivity wastage or leakage happens around all these manual processes that we talk about. So on an average, 40% of the time window on a finance close is gone into just reconciling stuff that should have been reconciled long ago. Supply chain teams are doing approvals and collections and all sorts of those. So let's take some practical examples as to, if you are able to free this bandwidth, this capability, that capacity that is kind of occupied in these repetitive tasks, it will increase organization's ability to respond order of magnitude, right? So what's Oracle's approach to supporting that? I think you could talk a little bit about that from apps, data, and support perspective. That would be great.
Okay, I'll lead into that, but before I just go back a little bit and take that AI jobs, and you walk into a warehouse and you see people on spreadsheets. You walk into planning, you know, docking yards, and they're still working spreadsheets. The gap between that and just using apps or using AI to help them is increasing productivity tenfold at the board. And it's not just around losing jobs, you know, it's not at all about that. So you need to look at that. when it comes into how's Oracle using that technology, I'll come back to the speed thing again, right? Is even if you jump out of supply chain a second, you take a look at our house in Oracle. This is one of those where I say Oracle always, I think it's often, but I think it's always. We're always the first company to report our earnings, right, on the news subject, because we use our own technology, right? And that's about pulling the data, having everything in-house. That's the same data we use to run our own supply chains too, right? So the short answer to how is it, what's our approach is the speed and quality of decision making is helping an organization, right? So this is possibly where I do a little plug and you put me in there, but organizations really need that end-to-end connectivity to be able to talk to everything. Everything in silos. We know it doesn't work. Best of breed. We're seeing organizations struggle with that, and I've seen it more than just about anybody on the planet, probably. But so our approach really is, if you look at the SCORE model, as we talk about in supply chain, if you go PLM, S&OP, inventory, manufacturing, maintenance, order management, sourcing, transport management, global trade, warehouse management. Gerald, they'd kill me, but so literally end to end, we are covering applications that drive absolutely incredible results and are connected. So when I talk about Oracle's rolling up its reporting as quickly as possible using our finance tools, we're using the same development. Gerald talked about the size of the budgets we have. Supply chain is an absolute imperative for us and a core pillar of investment, and we are driving those apps to be able to deliver that same sort of results and accurate applications. And we've over 4,000 customers. They're in a good place by having their systems integrated. There's no doubt about it. So and again, you go back to you talking about the AI coming in. If spreadsheets are very hard for organizations to run and scale, right? And I'm seeing it as a growth inhibitor in many organizations, but it's also inhibiting their associates as well, because they don't have a growth mindset. They don't have a change mindset. They have frustration and attrition challenges, right? You just go in and you see drudgery, or we go in and do demos and you see people really leaning in, their faces light up. This is what they need and want to make their world better. They don't consider they're losing roles upon it. So it's very rewarding, and you're in a great place. And from our point of view, to be able to help those organizations, like I mentioned earlier, everything you need, innovation that matters to your associates and to your business, and we're the partner that's committed to their success. That's what our DNA and how we approach it.
Anything you want to add, Charlie?
I do. I want to call out a couple things. One of the other facts that we're all dealing with globally is that skilled supply chain and manufacturing talent is actually we have a shortage of that right now. I think it's projected to be about 2+ million people short of the work that needs to get done. We have a generation of real experts retiring. So we've got a drain of experience that's about to hit most companies that I talk to. One of the things that AI can do is, first of all, the next generation is going to be AI native. They're going to be digital natives for sure, but they're going to be using AI in every aspect of their personal lives. And so they're going to be expecting to see the same sort of technology in the workplace. So we've got to just keep up to what the expectations of the new workforce is going to be expecting. Number two, the state of AI today, when you take, something as powerful as a large language model and you integrate it into your execution transaction layer, you're now able to create agents and advisors to help reduce the learning curve, right? Accelerate the onboarding of new employees as you go through this transition. You're able to make your average technician as good as your best technician, because the best practices from one on a different side of on the planet, possibly, if you're using the same system, those practices are now available at the fingertips of every technician across your supply chain, right? So that's the vision that we have for AI. It's really a necessary accelerator for onboarding and adoption and shortening learning curves, and it's becoming an expectation for the next generation of workers. So it's
Yeah,
part of the solution, definitely not part of the problem.
absolutely. And thank you both of you. I mean, there's some relevant points, but I think a couple of things that Nigel you mentioned. Of course, we come to Oracle and AI. We'll have this discussion, but you talked about growth mindset. You talked about spreadsheets inhibiting that growth mindset. I mean, it it's it's as simple as that broken connection in a process that is being filled by a spreadsheet, and somebody who is with a growth mindset wanting to serve the customer whole a little bit better just to meet the promise. It just breaks the whole cycle. And um, that I believe one of the greatest sort of issues around supply chain is that while the customer promise is made as in a horizontal organization, right, everything else is siloed in the company. And every silo is very efficient in its own right. But if you look at horizontally for a customer promise, it's not doing the job. And that's what Oracle is aimed to do. And when you put this sticky plaster on every silo because it's that spreadsheet is doing great work, and we're losing that grander picture of what the customer is looking for. I think having Oracle's that common data model, the process model, and the data in one place, that's the price of this whole thing ultimately, because customer is going to get what they've promised to get, hopefully on time, maybe better than that, better time. So but let's continue talking about the AI side and fusion. We are on that journey right now. And Gerald, we saw in March that fusion applications are now fusion agentic
Yes.
applications. It's a
Yes.
huge capability uplift that has happened already. For those who don't still don't know what fusion is, of course, the built from ground up capability years ago for cloud, and now AI ready.
Mhm.
And this, I really like this phrase, AI built in, not bolted on. And that's so powerful and so meaningful when you look at this in the context of that customer experience I talked about, because
Yeah.
you need to be able to know what each of these silos are doing. Um, there's also a bit of an objection that you get, which is it needs data, but the data is trapped outside. It's not in Fusion. So what's kind of your how can businesses take advantage of that built-in,
Yeah.
not bolted on? When if you can throw some light and
Yeah.
guide people as to how to do it.
Yeah, well, let's. I'm going to pray to the Wi-Fi gods here to make sure they don't cut me off, this time. But let me explain to you what this really means. This is a huge deal. Built
Yeah,
in, not bolted on, right? So 10 years ago, when we created Fusion, we made the decision architecturally that it would be built cloud native on Oracle Cloud infrastructure. We decided not to build it in a traditional, what I call sort of legacy on-prem way and wrap it in a container and say you can host it in the cloud, multiple spots. We
yeah,
decided to make it cloud native. Now, what that enabled us to do was evolve the product as the underlying technology evolves. So as they reinvent the database, our applications can take advantage of that database. As they reinvent modular development, we can take advantage of that. As user experiences sort of evolve, we can take advantage of that without having to completely overhaul the product. We are designed to take advantage of technology as it evolves. Now, when it comes to AI, I'll go back to the killer that we talked about earlier, which is latency, which is time, right?
mm,
It takes time to take data from your on-prem systems, put it in the cloud, vectorize it, contextualize it, and then have agents built to go and mess with that data. And then it also takes time for an agent to send signals back down to your execution layer. We took a look at that, and we know that many companies are actually doing that. But what they're recognizing now is that introduces such latency that their ability to collapse that sense and respond gap to nearly zero is almost impossible. So what we've done is we've essentially evolved the application to not just be database, data, logic, UX. We've actually taken large language models and AI and embedded it in as one of the core components of building an application. So the same data that you're using to create your orders, manage your transactions, update inventory, that same data store is both vectorized and relational to where large language models interact directly with your transactional systems of record. This removes a whole layer of latency. It enables, and with the common data model that you just mentioned, it enables a seamless orchestration of process across planning, execution, manufacturing, order management. All of it is available. And so now we can reimagine how we manage disruptions without thinking about silos. We can think about things holistically. We can act at the speed of light. And that's what's possible when you've got the AI built in, as opposed to having it bolted on with the associated latency that you get when you're bolting things on. And I won't even start talking about the challenges associated with managing all this new data and data harmonization and data restructuring and refactoring when you're pulling things out of the execution systems.
And security and cost, of course, as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I think at the launch of it or soon after, I watched that podcast or live by Chris Leone talked about how system of record is changing to be systems of outcomes, because now you actually have the ability to not just maintain a record, but you're actually starting to take action so that the outcomes are achieved and it can work on
cool
the
deal. Sorry. Let me just jump in real quick on that note. Sorry. Because we've got the AI built in to the application, we're building agents inside of the transactional layer.
Yeah.
Now, with this new agentic applications, within minutes, and I mean minutes, we can now give an application an outcome-oriented prompt and say, I want to be able to do this better in my business. And I know it's going to take inventory, planning, manufacturing. It's going to take multiple parts of the application to do. And so what the app does is actually looks and sees across the catalog of agents that you have in your business. And this could include non-Oracle agents. And it looks up there and it now creates an orchestration layer for you. So you can now manage your business by coordinating the actions of agents that are living within your Fusion application and also orchestrating action outside. It completely changes the game.
Yeah,
and these capabilities can, like I said, they can be drafted in minutes. You can have a Kaizen event in your organization, and at the end of the Kaizen, you've got functional and scalable solutions. This is not possible with the bolt-on.
This is what I meant in the beginning, that I think we've got a duty to keep educating our users, because from the on-prem world to cloud itself was a major step forward. The modularity, the richness of functionality, the security, to now having AI right built on top of that same ecosystem of applications. It's a huge deal. And I think we have this duty to talk about it and not undersell it, because some organization somewhere can take great advantage, faster to deploy, the narrow time that the narrow implementation time narrowed significantly. They could start without having to embark on a 2 years, 3 years transformation project. That's the ability that it offers right now. And Nigel, if I move to you, just talking about our EBS and on-prem, the kind of legacy customers who are watching, who've looked at Oracle Cloud for a while. I mean, there's a lot new in Oracle's kit bag that these customers can leverage. But there's also confusion, right? There's like some massive transformation. We have to go to all great pains of transformation, etc. So what's the message that, how do we inspire them? How do we get them on this journey? Because they are being guided by others that, hey, you just put a layer of AI on top of your legacy and suddenly all of it become real. And in doing so, we're missing an opportunity of what could be a great deal of competitive advantage for those organizations using these agentic applications. So where do they start? What's the pragmatic advice?
So it wouldn't just be our on-prem; it'd be all on-prem clients, really. Like, they can all turn these apps on, right? I mean, my message would probably be that if you think about the strategy from their CEO, right? And most CEOs jump off their jet and they're into the AI world, and they believe that there's going to be a huge impact on the industry for the next 3 years, and there will be, right? But even they know that only about 25% or so of their entire group is able to compete and work in this world, right? They just feel there's a huge gap. So heads of supply chain need to act upon that, because Gartner just recently did a survey, actually, and supply chain leaders were one of the least trusted in the transformation across the C-suite org to be able to take on and adapt this change. And so that obviously that's concerning. So the solution is trust, really, building that trust gap and acting upon it. Like you say, many of them are going to want to bolt stuff on. I've got some money, throw it at it, and they don't realize the cost of running it, the cost of upkeeping it, the cost of building it. It's whereas they can move into the apps, and we've been spending an awful lot of money and a lot of time building multiple different AI agents that can do many things for them, and some of them are lost in what even the various forms of AI is, right? And which is fair, but I would just say, somebody said it to me the other day, so I'll retell what they said to me. Was, it's like fruit. It's a strawberry, it's a raspberry, they all taste different, but it's what they're doing for you, and that flavor is the flavor that it does something for your business, right? And that's how you need to look at it, because it's going to, the world's developing that quickly. There'll all just be other tools, but it's what are they actually functionally doing for your organization. And so if these leaders look upon what the CEO wants, what their strategy is, how quickly they need to get there, where they're most exposed, and then the apps can then come in and fill that gap very quickly for them and their associates, because building this is going to take a lot of money and a lot of time. And that's what a lot of them like about moving over.
Yeah. And I mean, one example I could share, one of the pharma sort of color coating company in the Americas, they have 5-6 plants globally. They manufacture the same thing everywhere. And it plays right to the heart of this disruption we are talking about, right? Something happens in America, they can actually transfer the whole production over to Europe in a short space of time. And we just use this whole production layer of the fusion, working with EBS and other technology to say, well, you can start doing those changeovers, but you're not actually building a customization in EBS or other technology. Now you're also leveraging your journey of cloud. And suddenly that has enabled them to now start looking at the agents and how they can transform some of the experiences. I mean, that's the practical use case where your business process might allow for it, but we're not looking at it as where can we actually start? What is the use case that is the most relevant for me to experiment with and then put to production? And I think the combination of cloud modularity, the AI built in, the integration capabilities, and the holisticness of it, or the end-to-end nature of it. I mean, that's opportunity right there for all the customers that are using Oracle ecosystem. Great. Well, there's a lot to talk. We are 10 minutes or so to our hour. I have two topics that I definitely want to touch on. One is this distinction between human in the loop versus human in the lead. And I think it plays back to resilience, the AI workforce narrative, and control and security, because these fears are real, right? These risks are real, that how much can you trust it? Because already the trust level is very low, and then you automate it, and then it just, maybe this becomes the cause of a disruption rather than anything else. So how do we kind of play to that and advise and allay these fears, Gerald?
Yeah. I'd say this: when we talk about supply chain, we're this is going to sound a little wonky nerdy, but we're talking about what I call probabilistic problems. I've been working in AI for a long time, and I remember there's back in 2015, 16, a lot of the IoT space was about building physics-based digital twins for equipment so that you could be deterministic about failures and about predicting failure, right? Being deterministic mattered in certain cases when you're dealing with like physics and you're talking about airplanes flying, right? When it comes to supply chain and managing through disruptions, it's much more probabilistic, and it's much more about trade-offs that you're comfortable with, right? Am I going to, take the hit on cost, or am I going to invest in a customer relationship and spend a little bit extra to expedite, right? Understanding that end-to-end supply chains are not deterministic decisions. It's a bit of the art that goes with the science. And so when we're looking at large language models and current AI, these are probabilistic engines that actually shortcut the amount of time it takes for you to evaluate multiple options. So when we talk about humans in the loop and humans in the lead, humans in the lead are determining the outcomes that matter. And then they're using the AI to get back options, right? Not only options, but implications of each option. If you do this, this will happen. If you do that, that will happen. And then you as the human are in the lead with deciding which fate you want the company to go towards, right? Now, on the other end of that spectrum, you've got human in the loop, where you've got maybe more routine operations. You're cutting POs. You want to make sure that a human is approving, because these are probabilistic models and not deterministic, right? You want a human in the loop to make sure that the AI isn't hallucinating, so to speak, right? But it really changes the game in terms of how people engage with work and how AI can assist. And one of the areas where I see the most change happening is in the area of scenario planning. Scenario planning, we've typically said, hey, I think these 5 things might happen. So let me run the plan to see if this is my demand. Let me run the plan to see if this is my supply. Now, the interesting thing is, when you're running the plan, the output of the plan is still a bunch of charts and spreadsheets that you have to understand, well, what's the impact of this plan, right? Now, fast forward to today, what's possible now with AI, you can ask the question, what should I do when this happens? And then it comes back with, these are the 3 options that you can take, and these are the implications. It completely changes the game. You don't have to run your whole plan like rapidly, again. So this in memory, run the whole plan 5 times, having 6 versions of your plan, and then having some savant being able to sort of decipher that. That is what everybody thinks scenario planning is. But thank God we don't have to do that anymore.
And with this agentic framework, it's in the workflow now, right? So both the loop and the lead and this whole
it's in the journey to the outcome.
Journey to the outcome. So nicely said. Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've come closer to our time, so I want to just sort of ask open question to both of you, and this is more about customers looking at this and saying, well, it's all well and good, but how do I start? Where do I start? And I'm sure you're getting those questions from time to time. So what do you say? How do you inspire? What are your message to people on the fence right now, either the Oracle customers that are set with the on-premise technology, or the new ones who are looking at Oracle with that hope?
Okay. Yeah, go on. Yeah. So, I mean, it's easy for me to pay this back in the words of another customer, right? And so, head of supply chain, it's like, why am I waiting for another banana skin, right? Do you know how much each one of these things costs me, right? It slips up, it's security, it's delivery, it's OTIF, whatever it is, right? They cost me a lot. And so why wait? Because it's moving forwards and I've got to get with it, right?
Yeah.
I would say, next week, Gerald and I are in Barcelona meeting clients. So welcome to meet anybody that's there. They're going to be talking about trade in transition. That's probably going to be the banner, something like that. But it's about the autonomous supply chain in the era of AI, right? Resilience that we've covered here is going to be a huge topic, and disruptions, right? Scenarios they've never seen before. So, what was good enough to get them there isn't good enough to get them where they need to get to, right? So, but also it's proven. Like, you're seeing measurable results from organizations that are on their path. So other than that, take your time. No rush, but hurry up. Is that what they say?
That's always awesome.
Yeah.
Gerald.
The only thing I would add to that is now is not the time for incremental. The world that we the world that we built our supply chains for the last 20 years no longer exists. Like, that's just fact. It just doesn't exist, and it's not coming back. We live in a world that is dynamic, and we need new foundations, and the way we do work needs to be re-engineered. So the idea of being incremental towards AI it's a misnomer. We have to rethink our processes anyway. And one of the challenges that people are afraid of is, like, moving to a new foundation, a new base technology requires them to change the way they work. They should see that as a good thing, because now is the time to change the way you work. And you can do that by putting yourself on a modern platform that's designed to be agile, designed to take waste out of your processes and give you back the speed and the time you need to be competitive. Be bold is what I would say. It's time to be bold.
Time to be bold. That is so relevant to end today's conversation on. Thank you, both Nigel and Gerald. Just a quick summary from my side, and of course, you're welcome to add to that. But some of the things that we heard, right? So we talked about, are we ready? And that's kind of the main topic. And what was relevant today, just to remind people that the disruptions have tripled in last 3-4 years. The pace at which they're happening, the unpredictability of these, and therefore a capability that is able to take that in, do the scenario planning, fast responses, amplifying your growth mindset. So it's not like you still have to work with the old tech. There's a tech that actually supports that growth mindset, and bridging that gap of, yes, I have a vision, but I'm not able to execute. That gap is getting bridged. But all of that requires some level of boldness and sense of urgency, and starting with something rather than waiting for a perfect time. Essentially, that's what we are saying. And the tech is here, the ability is here, the AI is here, the agents are here, we are here, everything is ready. So why are we waiting for? That's the question, I suppose. So, well, meet gentlemen in Barcelona if you're visiting Gartner event. I think it's happening next week as well. But Nigel and Gerald, thank you very much for sharing your insights, and thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great.